Okay. Yeah, I think we're live.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the 5.1 webinar. We have a lot of exciting features to showcase. I'm going to be kicking this off first, primarily covering some graphics, a lot of the rendering additions, and then I'll switch off to Isabel, who will be showing you guys different UX updates, avatars, 2D, 3D tools, as well as materials. So without further ado, I'll just jump right into it. Oh yeah, excuse me. And if you guys have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to use the chat and we'll try to address as many as we can. And hopefully we'll have some time remaining as well towards the end of the webinar to address any topics you guys are curious about. So yeah, let's begin. First, I'm gonna share with you guys some updates with the graphics. Okay, so this one is in regards to overlapping graphics. So if you have two graphics that are overlaying on top of each other, just wait for that to kick in. Okay, so now if you have graphics that are on top of each other and you select them, you'll now get this window that asks you which one to select. And I know a lot of you have been asking for that because previously you would have to select them, move it to the side to select, but now you'll have that window to easily select each individual graphic, which is quite nice. So. As well as if you're moving graphics. So now you could just simply drag it to another pattern and that graphic will be applied. You no longer have to copy and paste it onto another. And that's pretty much all I have for graphics. But while we're on this, I think it's a nice segue into displacement maps. And I know a lot of you have been asking about that capability. And let me demonstrate how you do that. Okay, so if you want to apply a displacement map onto a graphic, that property lives within the graphics property editor here. So if I were to go about using a displacement map to protrude this graphic out, you can upload the map, so I'll just find mine. Okay, and a displacement map looks sort of like this. It's just really a black and white image. And the white part of the graphic is what protrudes out and the black just remains flat. So if I apply that map, you're gonna see all the different types of properties, which I'll go through. The amount is basically how much it's lifting. So let me just load that up to show you what's going on. Okay. Okay, so you have an idea what's going on. It's a little rough initially, and that's because the particle distance is quite high. So if you change the particle distance to a lower number, that just increases the geometry. Oops, that is, let me just re-import that. Oh, I see. Okay. So I just realized that the dimension of my displacement map did not match this image here, so that's why it was coming off-centered. So I think that's a good thing to point out. Make sure your maps are consistent with the bounding volume of your original image. So I'll go ahead and reapply the correct one in here. Okay, so there it is. I'll go ahead and load my displacement map. And let me get that render preview open. Okay, so you could see how the graphic is elevated, and I'm going to go back to those properties by selecting my graphic. Again, if you lower the particle distance, you'll increase the geometry count, which will give a little smoother results, preventing these more jagged edges. This is the amount it protrudes out. I'd suggest referencing in our online manual. We will link you in the chat room now, but this has great visuals on the different parameters that you can adjust. But the one I wanted to mention here is how the height is organized. So if you take this image, for instance, if you had the amount at 10, gray would be 5 and black would be 0. So you could specify different heights within the normal map. For this, it's simply just black and white, so anything that's white is going to lift up. So the image I used is just, let me just pull it up over here. So it's literally just an invert of the graphic I used. However, you can also apply Gaussian blurs to smooth out the edges. So let me apply this to show you the difference. And in order to prep this image type, I did do it in Photoshop. You cannot do the Gaussian blur within CLO, but that's kind of the effect you get. So you'll notice you have a lot smoother edges on the side. So there's also shift here. So if I increase the amount, I don't know, let's say 5 or something. So you'll notice sometimes there's some distortion with the geometry depending on how far you lift your displacement map. So shift essentially kind of sinks it back in. So if I use a negative value, let's try that. I'll probably have to do more than that. Let's say like -1. It will sink the graphic back in to kind of hide those jagged edges. So you could utilize the shift function for that reason, and a positive value would even lift it up. So if you have, a situation where you want something elevated off of the surface, you can also do that as well. And then clipping, I will demonstrate with another texture image. So I'm going to replace my texture with a slightly different one. Okay. So the one I'm going to use this time is a graphic that has a background. The one prior was a PNG image, but you can also use graphics with backgrounds, and you can use clipping to essentially remove that background. So I have the same graphic, just with the white behind it, and then I'll re-input my displacement map. Okay, so it comes in like that. Obviously that's not ideal, so with the clipping function, you can input your value and anything, excuse me. Okay, so anything below, all right, I'm just gonna pull up that image once more. Okay, so how it works, anything below that threshold will remove it. So the value in that example they're using is 0.1. The reason why you could still see the white, I'm guessing, is because I am using the one with Gaussian blur. So if I used this regular one here, I may have different results. Okay, so that's a little better. You can still see the white subtly. Maybe I can just up that value. And you can hide it to an extent with the clipping function. Okay. So also a nice improvement with the render is that there is material syncing capabilities. So right now my render preview is active. And if I were to change the color of this shirt, I no longer have to stop the render and refresh. I could just do it from this window and it will update my changes. This works for materials and colors. Let me just try that one more time. Okay, so if I were to go about changing the color, yeah, and this lag I'm experiencing could be from the streaming, but I think it just did it right there. So yeah, if you change the material types or the colors, it will update in the render window like it's doing now. So that's really convenient. Also, within your materials, we've had fur for a while, but now we've included presets for the fur. So I'm going to close my window here. So within fur, we've now provided you presets for you to select from. Before, you would have to just customize it yourself, but now there's a lot of options that you can utilize, including raw edge denim. For those of you who've been looking forward to that, we're all excited to have that option as well. And within the fur presets, we've also included a gravity portion. So the more gravity essentially you apply, the more the fur kind of droops down and lays closer to the material face. Okay, I'll just change that back. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and open the render once more. Looks like I changed that jacket to fur when I was demonstrating, so I'm gonna switch that back. And the material that's applied to this jacket is the Sherpa fleece that we have in our fabric library. And you could find all those fur ones I mentioned here as well. So different Sherpa qualities and the fur here. Okay, so within the render, couple updates in the settings. If you go to image and video properties, within turntable images, you can now specify the image count to 2. So if you just want a front and back render of your garment, you can select that here. Also, within the sizes, so the pixel dimensions here, you can now specify the pixels per inch. Prior to that, you would have to use one of the presets down below to get that to pop up, but now you could just specify it from any of these dimensions. And then lastly, on the bottom, you can either save your project with the project name itself, or type in your own custom name. So hopefully that helps you guys organize your render outputs easier. Okay, so we got some new stuff in the light properties here. Within environment map, so let me look through our assets here. Okay, it looks like I use a custom HDR here, but when you click on these 4 squares, we give you guys new presets, so you can use low, medium, high contrast HDRI files, so you don't have to download from outside resources. So we've gone ahead and provided you with those within here. Lock to camera essentially locks the environment map to the camera. So if any of you have experienced the back view of your garment a little dimmer than the front, that's because the lighting was only pointed towards the front. So now when you select lock with camera, it'll shift with that direction. So your garment will be lit the same in all different perspectives. And then there's show. So you can actually see your HDR images. So I gotta turn on my preview. Okay, so when I turn that on, you can see here my HDRI background. So you can see where the light's coming from. So if you guys had the background image here, you could view that. So let me see if I could find one in here. Okay. So I think I have a few on hand. Personally, I'm a fan of Venice Sunset. And like I mentioned, the background will kick in so you can stylize your renders. Okay, I'm gonna go back to contrast. The high contrast is one of the defaults we give you, and gives the file really nice like rim light and is well lit with good shadowing effects. So play around with those, and you can increase the light maximum to 10,000 now, which is kind of excessive, but that's just here. So, you can either input that number in the rectangular light, or I'm sure some of you are familiar that there is a lighting material preset here that you can also input. Okay, and then I'm actually gonna open up another file here. One really big update that I'm excited for is the capability of rendering animations. So I'm gonna open another file here. Okay. Bear with me, guys. I think my window just opened up on the second monitor, so I'm just waiting for it to load here. Okay, and then all right, so that kicked in. So this is a file I had already pre-animated. I'm not gonna have you guys, sit here and wait for it to render. But basically, you import your animation file. So in here you could see I used a Mixamo one, and you record the simulated garment in tandem with that animation file. So when this file is ready, you would have two bars here. So one for the Mixamo file and then one for the recorded garment that essentially overlays on top of the avatar. And once you do that, you would go into render, and then in image and video, you would select animation. And there's a couple options for animation. Well, for one, you can render all the colorways if you have multiple colorways of your project. Region is in regards to the duration. So the entire region is the whole animation, whereas if you selected play region, that would be if I specified like what part to record. And you can do that by just dragging over this blue bar here, and you could specify exactly like what portion you wanted to render. Then you would select save video, specify your frames per second, and then at the bottom here you do have some options for which video output to use. And then once you do that, so I've already pre-done it for you all. So you get a bunch of images of the animation itself, so you can have all these renders along with the video. So it looks something like this. I'm gonna drag it over here. Okay, so this is the render I did. So you end up with something like that. So yeah, this really opens a lot of possibilities, and I've been personally loving this feature. So that covers it for rendering for the most part. There is one other thing I'd like to mention, as a lot of people have asked for it. I'm gonna delete these garments here. Okay, so let's say that's my outfit, and if you apply top stitching, you can now export that top stitching in your OBJ UV coordinates. So those of you who are exporting out your textures, you can now bake the top stitch textures onto it. So I'm just gonna darken this up so you all can see a little better. Okay, so something like that, and then you would go about File, Export, OBJ, and then give it a name. Okay, so you would select Unified UV Coordinates, Unified Texture, and then we've also included the Save with Absolute Texture Image file path. Okay, let me just export that out. Okay, so now you could see there is top stitch. The resolution is a little shoddy, but there is the top stitch outline here. So that'll save a lot of you all time who've been exporting your textures out. And that kind of wraps it up for my portion of the webinar. So I'll be switching it off to Isabel. So look. Oh, do we have some stuff for the? Okay, so some of you asked about what the shift function is in Displacement Maps, so I'll just quickly revisit that before I pass it off. Okay. Okay, so shift, I'm gonna change my value here. Okay, so shift is what moves the displacement map. So if it's at a positive value, it moves the whole thing forward, like literally lifts the graphic off, as opposed to the amount, which just raises it from the face of the fabric. So if I do even a more dramatic value, it's raising off of the garment. So what I was mentioning earlier is utilize shift to kind of hide this distress here. So, and that would be a negative value, and a negative value would sink it in, right? So you can hide that kind of clipping going on with that value. Hopefully that's a little more helpful. Okay, so I'm gonna hand it off to Isabel.
Hello everyone. Hopefully you guys can all hear me. Just comment in the chat if the volume level changes and you need a little more volume from me. As Tambo mentioned, I'm going to go through The rest of the new features, basically some updates in different modes, the avatars and assets in the new library, and 2D, 3D, and material features kind of all interspersed. So let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is take you into emulator mode. So this is for people who are digitizing their own fabrics. So you'll be familiar with this. We've made a couple of improvements here, one of which is this button, enter all values. So a lot of people were asking to not have to go through each page here, but just enter all the values on one page. So that button now exists. And also as a way to improve our accuracy of drape, we have added a bending test to the bias, so a bias bending test. And that's it for updates in the emulator. I'm going to jump now to modular mode. So here I have my modular configurator. So if you don't have that, it's over here off to the side. So anyone that's used modular mode will be familiar. You now have a folder next to your men's and women's blocks. So man and woman, and here is a folded shirt. So we've created a folded shirt template for you. You have two options on the collar stand shape. So this is going to be like a packaged folded shirt. We've gotten a lot of requests for this. So it's going to come in on the floor. So I'm just going to look at it from above. Basically, it works like all of our other modular mode options, just double clicking into these choices. So plackets, collars, you can choose if you have a pleat on the back, how many pleats in your sleeve. The sleeve and the cuff are going to come in over here, kind of folded across a garment. That's just sort of the standard for this type of packaged shirt. And then lastly, you have options to add a pocket or a tie. You'll notice these symbols here. Basically, if you don't want a pocket or tie, you don't need to worry about adding them. But the reason that these exist is if you do add one of these and you'd like to remove it, it's better for you to double click that symbol as opposed to just deleting the pattern. That's going to affect the modular relationship, whereas here I can just take that pocket away. You'll notice in the template there is a frozen, it'll look blue probably, this frozen rectangle. There's two of these. These are essentially acting as your cardboard that the shirt is folded around. So if this ever gets in your way and you don't want to see it, just right click on it and hide the 3D pattern. So the shirting template is totally customizable as any other modular garment we have. I'll show you an example that I made. This is just a render of one that I did. So you can see I've customized a bit of the collar shape and added my own labeling, placket label, even a size sticker. So I really didn't need to even simulate this at all. This garment is meant to come in like very crisp and just so, as opposed to the need to actually fold the shirt in 3D. So the beauty of this is that it's crisp and perfect. So I either put things in here with my gizmo, or in the case of this sticker, I just sewed it to my garment and superimposed. We're just testing some things on the mic right now. Apparently, I sound really deep. I don't have a naturally deep voice, but if it sounds like that, then awesome. Alrighty. So another mode change is going to be in print layout mode. I'll just go straight there from here. You may have known in the past that print layout mode would have been grayed out and not accessible if you had not yet added a fabric to your garment. So here I have all of my fabrics are default, and I'm still able to get into print layout mode. So this is a new feature that we've added for you. Cool. I'm going to go back into simulation, and I'm just going to make myself a new file. So I'm going to show you guys all of the additions to the asset library, so mostly to the avatars. You'll see, firstly, you may see that you have this little N symbol next to your download button. That just means there are new assets you haven't yet downloaded. So one shift that we've made is we've added so many assets to the library, and we anticipate continuing to add more. So we want to make the download of the software as fast as possible for you, and we understand most people don't need every single asset. So now we're allowing you to choose what you'd like to see. So you can see I have some new things in my mail folders, and I can go into those. I know they're in my pose folder. And if I want to download them, I can actually check these little boxes here and download things individually. Or if you hit this checkbox, you can choose to download everything that's in this folder. So it just gives you a little bit more of a choice and customization in how much stuff you have in your library. So you'll notice now we've grouped our avatars into 5 folders. So we have male and female versions 1 and 2, and then a folder for kids. The versions 1 will be a little familiar to you. So we have in the women's folder, Emma and Kelly. So the version 1s, both male and female, also come with some default animations. So you can now use these with the new animation render feature. We've also added some new avatars. So version 2 are some new people. We have Fifi, Grace. So we have Mara is pretty familiar, but she has changed a bit. So different skin tones, different looks, and we've added a bunch of hairstyles. So all the avatars have access to the same hair, new shoe options. We've added some pose options, so not just the standard T and attention pose, but also some fashion poses and some poses that are specifically used for fit. So we've provided these for you guys to check the fit of your garments. So I'm just going to bring in one of the new avatars. This is Fifi. And one of the really exciting things we've added is a size folder. So these are a bunch of ASTM standards. We have Missy, curvy and straight, petite, curvy and straight, and plus curvy and straight. And then you'll see at the bottom, this is the CLO default size. So the way you can use these is actually just to double click into them, and she will change. So let's see some plus. Plus curvy. And one of the things that we've provided for you guys with the plus size is in the pose folder, there is an actual plus folder. So we've provided this to give you a little bit of room in terms of arrangement. We know, of course, like most of us do not have a thigh gap, but we wanted to provide this, of course, for 3D. It's a lot easier if you can just space the avatar out. Of course, that's why we build things with her arms in T-pose. So we provided these for you for building purposes, and then you can pose her back in a natural pose after building your garment. So in the kid folder, you will find there's a toddler-sized child. This is going to be good for sizes T2 up to about 6. And then we have a male and female child for sizes 7 up to 20, so like bigger kids. And these are all 3 editable in our avatar editor, which our children's avatar was not editable before, so that's a new feature. So running off of that, I'm going to go into the changes on our avatar editor. So there have been a lot of improvements to the avatar editor. The first thing I want to point out that you'll notice is are the 3 options now for inputting your specs. So basic still exists. We intend this for people that have minimal specs and don't have the full array, and so they can just do it at a basic level. And the main thing that's changed is we now have advanced human body versus dress form. So the main difference between these is just how the measurements are taken. So our previous spec sheet was based on the standard for dress forms, and a lot of those measurements are difficult to take from the human body, and we got a lot of feedback that people don't have those measurements of their fit model or their own body. So we've made the human body measurements a little bit easier. So things like high and low hip will come from the waist. Waist will be measured down from the neck. The sleeve or arm length will be measured from center back. So we've just basically revised this to be more in sync with the standard way people measure. And then one of the main changes for the female avatars is that we have made the under bust the anchor point up here instead of the bust, which allows you to actually increase the bust much more significantly without affecting her body below. So you can see she just has the chance to get a much larger bust now. So those are the main changes, and I think using the human body, if you were having any issues with the heights and getting issues with her posture, those will be alleviated if you start using the human body spec sheet. One minor change that we've made is we've added some guides like inseam. If you select the inseam, you will see the guide of where that measures to. I recommend editing your avatar when she's standing flat on the floor because it's easier to tell what this is marking, but essentially the inseam is going all the way to the floor when she's not wearing shoes. So that's just a guide to help you see that. And as with all the others, when you select them, you'll see what the guide is showing, where it's being measured from. Lastly, with the avatar, if you go into your X-ray joints, which is how we pose our avatars, and you select a joint, you're going to see this little person icon in the top right corner. If you select it, it will turn blue, and this is going to allow you to adjust her symmetrically. So if you want to move the left and right arm or leg in the same way, you can just click this little guy. And then one last asset in the library is an addition to the hanger folder. We have added kid hangers for all of the adult hangers that we had. We now have a smaller children's version of that. Cool. Now I'm going to get straight into a bunch of the 2D tools. So the first tool I'll show you guys is the new PLM tool. They're located up here. You have your edit point of measure and your point of measure. So you'll see I've actually already created some in here. Just give them a second to pop up. So here they are. You have a new tab in your object browser called PLM. So basically what this is an internal spec sheet within CLO. And you use the PLM tool to create these. So I've created some here. When you select it, you will see which PLM it is. It highlights in yellow, and I can actually name this now. So in order to create a PLM, you want to use this tool here, and you're just going to start clicking on the points that you want to add, and then you just double click to end. So you can see I can actually go across multiple pattern pieces. So here would be my half hip measurement, my high hip, flat. So depending on whether or not you measure in circumference or flat, you can choose to go all the way across your garment. And you can do your circumference measure as well. This is really great because you can actually just go across any pattern piece. So here I could do my sleeve length from center back. And you'll see while this is highlighted, I get the total length and then I get the length of just this line. So now I can see this is my sleeve length from center back, 13.275, and my sleeve length from shoulder point is 5.686. So that's how your PLM tool works. After you name these all out, you have the option to save here. It's going to create a little Excel spreadsheet. And I'll just show you, I made one in advance. So this is one that I created before. So these are all my descriptions. It numbers them for me. And this is how they came in. And just to show you guys, I created a separate column. All I had to do was highlight these and format them in the Excel. So it's going to come into the decimal point it shows in CLO, and then just by formatting in Excel, you can choose like how you want to round that out, and if you want it to be fractions or decimals or whatever. And if I was in centimeters, it would come out that way as well. So in order to get rid of these, if you don't want to view them anymore, under the Info tab, it's just this ruler. Will hide and show the POMs, and in 3D under the Garment tab there's a ruler as well. So one of the new features that we've had requested for a long time is half symmetry. So if you're familiar with CLO, you know we like to work on the half in order to maintain symmetry, but we've now made it possible for you to do that without a seam in the middle. So I'm just going to show you, I'm going to go ahead and delete this pattern. And there's a couple ways of doing this. The first I'm going to show you is I'm going to right click on center back and unfold with symmetric editing and sewing. I'll just simulate that. And you can see because everything this is sewn to is also symmetric, it comes in already sewn. So all my sewing is already there. So you can see if I drag a point on this right side, it moves on the left as well. And when I select one side, you can see in the same way that our symmetric patterns highlight yellow and blue, the symmetric halves do the same. So that's one option. The other option too is if you have a symmetric pattern like this and you want to merge it, it will actually maintain its symmetry. In the meantime, I'm going to show you another feature in the process. So this seam right here, my back rise, is sewn, and normally if I were to delete these points, the sewing would also be deleted, but we have changed that now so that your sewing will remain. So I just wanted to delete those points, so now I can right click and merge this pattern. And you can see because they were symmetric, when I merged them, they're also now symmetric on the fold. So that's two ways of doing that. Another new feature we have is similar to offsetting the pattern outline where it would extend the pattern, we have added a retract feature. So in the past, you might have had to offset an internal line and then cut that line, or you would just want to drag your leg opening up, but you might be restricted by a curve point like I am here. And you may also realize that you don't want your small leg opening here to be so small up here. So I'm going to use the new feature of offset pattern outline, and I'm going to choose from the drop-down retract. So this is going to allow me, I'll just put something big in here like an inch. So it'll offset there, and I can go really big. You'll see if I go too far, like if I accidentally type something, I typed 111, which is obviously much bigger than my pattern exists. The whole pattern turns red, and it's basically warning me I'm not allowed to do that. But you can in fact go really far. So if I want to do 15, it will let me bypass this segment point and chop it all the way off. So the next tool I'm going to show you guys is our new pattern walking. So walk pattern is up here in the 2D toolbar. The way this works is you just select the point of your pattern, and then you select the point you want to match it to. And then that pattern is going to walk along that seam. You'll get to see how the shapes go together. You also have the ability to right click here, and you can add a notch to both patterns. I can also, if I want to add a notch here to where the shoulder point is on the sleeve so that I can see how much ease I have, I can just right click and add a notch only to my stationary pattern. And then I just hit enter to end that. Similarly over here, I can walk it up to my dart, and I can add a notch just to the walked pattern. We now have the option with the notch tool to right click on a notch and add a point. So if I went back to my pattern walking, I can now walk above the dart here. Cool. So that's how walking the pattern out works. If you are a Bezier curve person, you use the Edit Curvature tool. You're familiar that you can always just click and drag with that tool to change the shape of your curve. And then you can also use the Edit Pattern tool and adjust the curve using the handles. But we've now added the feature that with the Edit Curvature tool, if I hold Control while dragging, it's going to lock me into the angle of my handles. So this is really nice. It keeps me from messing up the curve where it meets maybe my shoulder or my center front neck. So it just keeps me locked in. So in a similar way that we use Control on our Edit Pattern tool, we can now use it with Edit Curvature. While I'm over here on this front pattern, I'll show you some additions we've made in seam allowance. So I'm just going to add seam allowance to my whole pattern. You can see before we would add seam allowance to the dart as though the dart was cut out, and got a lot of feedback that people want to be able to add it for when the dart is not cut out. So if I select my dart point here, I have some new options in the intersection. I can choose the fold based on whether or not my dart is folding down or up. So you'll see you have these little arrows here, and you can select whichever direction you want the dart to fold. It will add seam allowance as though the dart is not cut out. We have a new update to some of the pattern creation and internal shape creation tools. So the rectangle, they're going to work the same way for the pattern or the internal. I'm just going to do it with the rectangle tool. So in the past, you would click and drag, and you'd be dragging from one corner of the rectangle. Now, if you hold Control, your rectangle is going to be created from the center out. So I'm just going to make myself a little pocket here. I'm going to show you guys some updates on the zipper tape. So I'm just going to put a zipper in here. So an update we've made is if you select your zipper tape, you'll see in the property editor, you now have the option to select a preset fabric physical properties. So I can change this to nylon featherweight, and you'll see my zipper becomes flimsier. Or you can stiffen that up with something that's a little stiffer. So basically now you can make the actual properties of your tape a little more accurate now. So we have a couple of sewing improvements. Mostly that will help you with sewing in 3D. So if I just pull her sleeve out here, I'm gonna delete this sewing just on my armhole. One thing that we've changed is you can see I'm sewing with my free sewing tool, and we've added the snap to a sewing line. So in the past it would snap if there was a point, but when you were meeting another sewing line you kind of just had to visually line it up, and now it's a clean snap. So we've added that. And also if I'm sewing with free sewing in 3D, you'll see that now you get your blue dot. So now I have my blue dot showing me the equal distance in sewing that I have in the past just had in 2D. So that just helps you make free sewing in 3D a little more practical and accurate. So while I'm up here, I'm just going to show you something to do with the binding. I've got some binding on my sleeve here. And if I select that binding, I now have the option in the property editor to change the grain to bias. So we got a lot of requests that we all know binding is typically on the bias. So now we have some presets of weft, which would be cross grain, and bias, and you can also enter a custom angle. So you can basically put the grain on any angle that you want. A couple of updates in the vertical toggle menus. In the 2D window, you'll see there's a back textured surface. This is going to show you the back side of your fabric and your garment. So mine has the same texture front and back, but what you will see is I have a back neck label inside my garment. And now I can see that graphic. So when I toggle back to the face, that graphic goes away. You may also notice the graphics no longer have the big bounding volumes around them, so it's a little less cumbersome and stressful to the eye. You just see the graphic itself, so now you can also limit that to the front and back. It's worth noting if you use opaque or transparent surface, these are just kind of applied to wherever you are. So when I go to the opaque surface, I'm still on the back texture. So if I want to be on the front, but then in opaque, I need to just do that first. In the 3D window, one of the changes to the vertical toggle menu is we've added display options at the bottom. So your environment display. This all used to be up here in the display menu, but this just gives you quick and easy access. So here's my dome light, my wind, the 3D shadow, and also the 3D grid. And lastly on this file, just in terms of materials, I'm sure a lot of you have heard that we now have a Pantone library. So if I click on my color chip, you'll see here that you have a number of cards in your Pantone library. So I have the very first card is nylon brights. All of these in the middle are different cottons. So an array of colors, and then the last card is polyester. And if you choose a Pantone color, you will see that that color name will show up next to your color chip. Cool. So I'm going to open another file here and show you guys some updates on puckering. So we have some updates to the tool itself and some updates to the library. So here I've got puckering on all these files, so I'm going to pan over in my object browser to my puckering tab. And this first one, I'll show you, we now have this drop-down menu in the property editor under puckering that gives you 5 defaults. So here I've chosen cotton, and what that's doing is selecting the cotton normal map. So it's a different type of puckering. You can use them for whatever you want, but we made these normal maps look like the fabrics that describe them. So the way puckering has always worked in the past is it's been a normal map, but we've now added the ability to put a texture image as well. So you'll find in the hardware and trims folder, there's a puckering folder, and you have texture images for all of those defaults. So I'm going to drag and drop my cotton. And basically what this is doing is the normal map creates kind of a puckered texture. The texture image is going to create sort of a wash. It's kind of lightening up my fabric there. So the opacity by default is 50, but you can play around with this if you want it more or less intense. So we have cotton, and here I got denim. Another way you can find these is just by clicking these 4 dots. They're going to show up here by default. We have leather. And nylon. And polyester. So in addition, now that we have the option to add a texture, you can also add your own custom ones. So I'm going to go into my folder where I've actually scanned my fabric and created my own custom wash effect by scanning the denim. It's actually tan boats, if I'm honest. So here I've got that effect of the double needle on my jean, and I also made my normal map from that. So some updates to the puckering tool when I apply this to my denim. You'll see we have added, in addition to segment puckering, we now have free puckering, which works just like free sewing, so I can bypass these segment points. We also have added seam line puckering, so I can apply it to both sides of my seam. And of course, we still have just regular segment puckering. So this is what my custom texture looks like. I can still come in here and play with the opacity and the density. Probably want to make it bigger. And the width. Just like you could before, but it just applies to your texture image. So I've used this as a wash. I think that's like the most go-to useful option for puckering, but this also means now you can use puckering the way you might have been using top stitching, where you apply a custom image in this texture image. So you can do a beading detail or whatever image you want to add. I'm going to move on to a button file, show you some updates with buttons. So here I have a graded front body piece. I'll just show you the grading for a second. So this file has the button marking graded, and in the past we needed a marking to grade the button placement. But we've changed that now so that you don't need to actually add a marking. I know for a lot of people in CLO, it's really easy to place a button without a marking and do it accurately. So we didn't want you to have to do that extra step. So here, if I just place my button, you'll see when I turn my grading back on that my button marking itself has graded. And if I head over here to my grading tab and maybe toggle to my large, you'll see I now have a button on my large, so it'll toggle back and forth. So the other update we've made to the button tool is if you hover over a pattern edge, you'll see it turn blue with the button tool, and if I right click here, I can actually add buttons to this pattern edge. So I get a set of options. This distance here is going to be the distance from the edge of the pattern to the center of the button. The interval at the top is the distance down from the top. And if you check this box reverse, you'll see in the 3D window, I'm too zoomed in 2D, but in the 3D window, it's actually now starting from the bottom. So if you do your measurement from the top edge, you can leave it as is, and if you do it from the bottom, just check reverse. This interval here is going to be the spacing between the buttons, of course, and then you have the number of buttons. So what this means is with my Select Move Button tool, I can't just grab these buttons and move them freely. But the beauty of this is that when I edit this line, my buttons will move with it. So if you decide that you do want to be able to move these freely, then you can just, with your Select Move Button tool, right-click on them and unlink the buttons and buttonholes. Now I can move this stuff around. The nice thing about this too, and a request we've gotten a lot, is for the ability to add them to curves. So this works on any segment. So if you have a curved seam or a detailed shape, you can add buttons along those. If they're rhinestones or any kind of detail, you now can kind of be controlled with a curvy line and adding buttons. Cool. So one last update to the button tool. I'm going to go ahead and add a texture to my button. So here I have a texture image. I'm going to drag and drop that over here. And we now have the ability to move this texture image around. So you'll see if you scroll down in the property editor under your button, we now have the little transformation tab drop down that we get with Fabric. So my texture now has this X and Y position, and I'm just clicking with my up and down arrows, and I can move that texture around. I also can drop these widths and heights down, and I can change the scale of it as well. So you have a little more flexibility on editing your button texture, unless you want to just use the UVs. The other thing I'll note is if I had a normal map in here, so I have a normal map made, you'll see it came in the same place as the first one. So as soon as there's a normal map in there, you'll see the normal map pop up under transformation as well. So I can match those up. Cool. So the next feature is called shirring. So here I have an elastic waistband. You'll see in my 2D window, this is my elastic band encased, and this is myself. And as most of you probably know, when we do elastic or gathers like this, it helps to get some definition to set your particle distance low. So this particle distance is already at 5. So you can see I get a decent amount of gathers. But if I check this out in my mesh view, you'll see my garment is set to 10 and my waistbands are set to 5. So you can see that here. So what we've created is a feature called shirring, which you apply similar to how you would apply elastic. It's just a checkbox in the property editor. So if I just select the top of my waistband and check shirring on, what this is doing is it's basically creating a really fine particle distance just in that one area. So the interval here is essentially the particle distance. So the lowest you can go is 0.039. So if I start with like 0.2, you can see it's much bigger. So again, this is 5, this is 0.2, 0.1, and again, the lowest would be 0.039. So I'm gonna have it as small as possible. Then the height here is just how tall the shirring is. So my height is currently just covering my entire waistband. So if I only wanted it on the top, I could do something like 0.5, and then I could even apply that to the bottom as well. If I just want that definition at the top and bottom. So what you're going to see this do if I simulate is my gathers become much finer. The real beauty of this is especially adding it to bigger pattern pieces like a skirt. So here I can do the same to my skirt. Check the sharing on. And you'll see it's only affecting that particle distance at the very top. So it's not going to slow your simulation down, but it's going to give you a much finer wrinkle up here. So in terms of the height, the max height is 3.898. And on this particular pattern piece, that comes all the way down to the center here, and it kind of blends out there. So you wouldn't want to go any higher than that anyway, because then you really start to slow things down. But you can see now her skirt has much finer gathers. So it just really depends on the look that you're going for and how much definition you need to make this realistic. So the last couple of things I'm going to show you guys are the new exciting features of auto grading and auto draping. I'm going to go back to my old file. So the first thing I'll show you is the draping. So we have this new button, Redrape 3D Arrangement. So if I go into my avatar folder, I know I have in here a Fifi that is flat on the floor. So in the past, you would probably need to, this may happen when you swap out avatars and garments and things like that, and you usually then have to rearrange your garment with your gizmo and move things around, and if their pose is off, it can just take some time. So we've created this Redrape 3D Arrangement button, and I will just click it, and it's going to snap the garment to the avatar now. And then lastly, I'm just going to show you guys the auto grading. So I'm going to bring in a little girl avatar. So the real purpose of auto grading is it's going to take the garment and the pattern you have now, and it's going to fit to whatever avatar you bring in. It does only work on the CLO avatars currently, but I think the most useful aspect of it is to go from one size run to another. So jumping from like a Missy to a petite or to a plus size, or even something as drastic as this. I've gone from men's to women's or men's to kids. So we're going here from women's to kids. All you need to do, you don't need to adjust anything in the 3D window about how it's actually draping. You just click this button here, auto grading. So one thing to think about beforehand is you want all your pattern pieces to be in a high particle distance, so 20 particle distance. It's going to be just the most optimal way, and it reminds you of that here, but it will move a lot faster and just be more accurate. Once you click the auto grading button, you get these options here. So maintain pattern curvature is really just about the shape of your pattern, especially around these curves, armholes, necklines, sleeve caps. I suggest first auto grading with this at 100%. If you want to then try sliding it down, if you're not happy with the results, you can do that. It may be necessary if you're going from, maybe a woman to a child would need less shaping in certain areas, but I haven't found yet that I've needed to adjust this. So try it first at 100. If you want to keep your graphics all the same size, you can check this box, and then you just say, okay. Geez, slow from the streaming. And there you go. So now we have this, you can see it basically auto draped and auto graded at the same time. I didn't have to move it onto my little girl. And you can see the reference lines for what your pattern used to be. So if there's anything about this that you aren't happy with or want to change, this is a fully editable pattern here. So you can use this to make these massive jumps, or if you didn't have a grade rule and you wanted to just bring in your size small avatar and grade from a medium to a small, it's going to work exactly the same way. So that's all I have to show you guys. If there are any questions that we need to show. So there's a little bit of a delay, so I'm just waiting for you guys to catch up to me and make sure that there's no questions we need answered. Hopefully Amy's answered them all in the chat already. Alrighty, so we had a question about plotting this out. And if it would keep the original outline. So this is coming in as a reference line. To be honest, we were not actually sure. I do know that in the past when I've done this, these lines actually at some point, I think when I closed and reopened the file, they disappeared. So this is an old reference line. We may need to run a test and we will get back to you on whether or not they plot out, but you could maybe also try cloning that pattern as a reference line before you auto grade. But yeah, I would have to test it out, but you can absolutely plot out your new auto graded pattern for sure. We'll just have to test if it holds that line. Cool. So we had a question about armhole circumference in the avatar editor. So armhole circumference is really a garment measurement. So if you're familiar with pattern making and tech design, you'll know like my garment here, which you can see in my 2D window, that armhole measurement, which would be what I might put in my POM list, that's going to be larger than my arm and depend on how the garment is meant to fit. So really the way to measure armhole circumference on a body is with the bicep. So the bicep is measured up here. There's a number of measurements going vertically. It's kind of a combination of your front length here, your bicep, your across shoulder. we don't really put in a human body measure for the armhole. It's not something I've ever measured on a model before. So it's just going to be determined based on those other contributing factors. So I hope that helps answer that question. Okay. So I think we're good. Amy is answering a few last questions in the chat, and we'll keep that open for you guys. But that's the end of the demonstration. And thank you guys so much for watching. We will have a recorded version of this up on our YouTube for anyone that missed it. And we will try to follow up with some timestamps so that you can jump around to the topics that interest you. So thanks again. For you guys who are asking about petite avatars, just know that in the avatar library where I was showing you the sizes, there's 2 sets of petite sizes for ASTM. So these are petite, and then they also come in all of those sizes. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, up to 18, or sorry, up to 20. So petite meaning short. And again, all you have to do is double click on these as long as you're in one of the avatars with that folder. So use the assets folder inside of that avatar folder. And there are sizes for kids and also sizes for the men. So somebody was asking about adding the circumference armhole measurement I'm guessing it's the same person that was asking about armhole circumference. If you do want to measure that, I'm just going to go ahead and hide my garment here. I know I'm on a little girl. It's a little creepy. She has a bra. It's okay. So your measurement tool may be hidden. So here's basic circumference. So what I'm going to do, the way this tool works is it's a 3-click process. So here's where we have it marked. I think that's maybe a little far out, but it's totally up to you what you want to do. I'll just follow that line. So you click once, and then you click the second time to set the direction, and then the third time is going to be setting the ring. So you can see as I'm moving on her, the ring is moving on her body. So you may need to zoom in quite a bit and play around with this to get it the way that you want. You may need to test out where those first 2 clicks happen. You might need to do them from above to have them be in line with this line. But yeah, it's just a 1 click, 2 clicks, and then you set your ring. So that pretty much works anywhere on the body. So play around with that. When you use this tool, if you hold shift, it will lock you into a straight line. So I do this a lot when I'm measuring like different parts of her torso. So I just hold shift while I'm clicking here, and I hold shift again will keep my ring locked in. If I let go of this shift, it's gonna raise up or down. Thank you guys so much for all the feedback and the questions. I hope you learned everything you wanted to about 5.1. And again, this will be up on our YouTube channel to rewatch. And Amy's going to sign off the chat right now. Thanks.